At exactly 9 a.m. on a cold October morning, I stood outside my late grandfather's lawyer's office in Boston, clutching the last birthday card he had ever given me. On the front, he'd written in his shaky handwriting, "No matter what happens after I'm gone, never let bitterness decide your future. Love, Grandpa Henry." I didn't know those words would be tested within the hour. My name is Olivia Bennett, and I was 29 years old when my own family decided I no longer belonged. For most of my life, my grandfather had been my safe place. After my parents died in a car accident when I was 16, he took me into his small Cape Cod home without hesitation. He worked as a carpenter until retirement. But to me, he was the richest man in the world. Not because of money, because of the way he loved people. Every Saturday morning, we built birdhouses in his garage. Every Sunday, we baked cinnamon bread. He never missed one of my school plays. Never forgot a birthday. Never stopped believing in me. When I graduated from college with a degree in architecture, he cried harder than I did. "You'll build beautiful things one day," he whispered. I believed him. Then cancer took him 8 months later. Walking into the law office, I saw my Uncle Richard, my Aunt Diane, and my cousins Kyle and Vanessa already waiting. No one smiled. Richard barely looked at me. "You're late." I checked my watch. "It's 8:58. He shrugged. "Close enough." That was Richard. Always looking for a reason to make someone feel smaller. Especially me. The attorney, Mr. Collins, invited us into the conference room. "My deepest condolences," he began. "Henry Bennett left very specific instructions regarding his estate." Richard leaned forward confidently. Grandpa owned a paid-off house, several acres of land outside Boston, investment accounts, and a successful woodworking business. Everyone knew the estate was worth several $1,000,000. Richard had already been telling people he would inherit everything. After all, he was Henry's only surviving son. Mr. Collins opened the sealed envelope. "The will states that the estate will be divided according to a private trust created 5 years ago." Richard smiled. Then the attorney kept reading. "The trust's primary beneficiary is—" He paused. "Olivia Bennett." The room froze. Richard's smile vanished. "What?" Mr. Collins continued. "Olivia Bennett will inherit 60% of the estate, including Henry Bennett Woodworks." The silence became unbearable. Then Richard slammed both hands on the table. "That's impossible. He would have never done that." Mr. Collins calmly placed another document on the table. "It was witnessed by 3 independent attorneys." Richard's face turned red. "She manipulated him." "I did no such thing," I whispered. Grandpa's letter was read next. "Richard, Diane, Kyle, and Vanessa. I love you all." But Olivia stood beside me every hospital visit. She drove me to chemotherapy. She missed work to care for me. She never once asked for anything in return. Inheritance is not a reward for being family. It is a responsibility given to the person who has already proven they care. I couldn't hold back my tears. Grandpa had noticed everything, even the things I thought no one saw. Richard stood abruptly. "This is fraud. I'll challenge it." Mr. Collins nodded calmly. "You're entitled to do that. But I should inform you, the trust was designed specifically to prevent legal challenges." Richard looked ready to explode. As we left the office, Richard blocked my path on the courthouse steps. "You think you've won?" I stayed silent. "This family built everything your grandfather owned. You don't deserve a penny." He made his choice. Richard stepped closer. "No, you stole my inheritance." People walking past slowed to watch. I quietly replied, "I never asked him for anything." He laughed bitterly. "You'll regret this." I thought he was simply angry. I had no idea he already had a plan. Within weeks, my bank accounts would be frozen. My reputation would be destroyed. The business my grandfather trusted me to protect would be pushed to the edge of bankruptcy. And I would find myself standing on a sidewalk with nothing but one suitcase, wondering how the people I called family had managed to steal everything. For the first week after Grandpa's funeral, I tried to believe Richard's anger would fade. I told myself grief made people say terrible things. I wanted to believe we could still be a family. I couldn't have been more wrong. Monday morning, I unlocked the doors of Bennett Woodworks. The business Grandpa had spent 40 years building. The smell of fresh-cut oak instantly reminded me of him. Every workbench, every tool, every scratch on the wooden floor held a memory. I smiled as I looked at the faded sign above the office door. "Quality lasts longer than profit," Grandpa's favorite saying. He had carved those words himself. I promised silently, "I'll protect this place." I had no idea someone was already trying to destroy it. Around noon, my office phone rang. "Ms. Bennett?" "Yes. This is First National Bank. We need to discuss your business loan." I frowned. "What loan?" There was a pause. "The operating loan secured against Bennett Woodworks." My heart skipped. There must be a mistake. "I've never taken out a loan." The woman sounded confused. "Our records show paperwork signed 3 weeks ago." 3 weeks ago? Grandpa had been in hospice. He could barely hold a pen. I drove straight to the bank. The manager spread several documents across his desk. My blood ran cold. There was Grandpa's signature. But it looked wrong. Forced. Shaky. Nothing like his normal handwriting. "Who witnessed these documents?" I asked. The manager checked the file. "Richard Bennett. My uncle. I believe these signatures were forged." The manager sighed. "I understand your concern, but until a court rules otherwise, the loan remains valid." "Miss Bennett, if payments aren't made, the business could face foreclosure." I left the bank unable to breathe. That evening, I drove to Richard's house. He answered the door holding a glass of expensive whiskey. "What do you want?" "You forged Grandpa's signature." He laughed. "Can you prove it?" "You'll lose." He shrugged. "Maybe, but lawsuits take years. Businesses go bankrupt much faster." Then he smiled. The smile made my stomach turn. "You should have accepted that this family belongs to me." He slammed the door in my face. Over the next month, everything fell apart. 3 of our biggest clients canceled contracts. Someone had anonymously spread rumors that Bennett Woodworks was financially unstable. Suppliers suddenly demanded payment up front. Equipment deliveries stopped. Insurance rates mysteriously increased. It felt coordinated. Because it was. Richard was quietly convincing everyone the company would soon collapse. One Friday afternoon, my assistant burst into my office. "Olivia, you need to see this." Outside the workshop, several customers were loading custom furniture into trucks. Without paying. "What are they doing?" "They said Richard authorized them." I ran outside. "You can't take those." One man handed me paperwork. The signature at the bottom read, "Richard Bennett." Forged again. By the time the police arrived, the trucks were gone. Nearly $200,000 worth of furniture had disappeared. That night I sat alone in Grandpa's office. I opened the bottom drawer of his desk. Inside lay an old photograph. Me at 8 years old. Covered in sawdust. Standing proudly beside Grandpa after building my first birdhouse. Written on the back were 6 simple words. "Always finish what you start, Liv." I cried harder than I ever had. "I don't know how." The answer came sooner than expected. 2 weeks later, I arrived home after another exhausting day. A moving truck blocked my driveway. What happened? A man in a suit approached me. "Are you Olivia Bennett?" "Yes." "I'm here on behalf of the court." He handed me legal papers. The house had been placed under temporary ownership review because of Richard's inheritance lawsuit, until the court resolved the dispute. I had 72 hours to leave. "What?" "This was Grandpa's house." "I'm sorry. I'm only delivering the order." I called Richard immediately. He answered after one ring. "Enjoying your evening?" "You had me thrown out?" He laughed. "I didn't throw you out. The court did. You'll get what's coming to you." "Oh, I already have." Then he hung up. 3 days later, I zipped my last suitcase. Every room echoed with silence. The home where Grandpa had raised me. The kitchen where we'd baked cinnamon bread. The workshop where we'd built hundreds of birdhouses. None of it belonged to me anymore. As I walked toward my car, I looked back one last time. I'll come back. Not because I wanted revenge. Because I couldn't bear the thought of Grandpa's home belonging to people who never loved it. I moved into the cheapest motel I could find outside Boston. The room smelled of old carpet and cigarette smoke. My savings disappeared quickly, paying lawyers and business expenses. Then came the final blow. The bank officially foreclosed on Bennett Woodworks. 40 years of Grandpa's work. Gone. I sat on the edge of the motel bed staring at the foreclosure notice. For several minutes, I couldn't move. Couldn't think. Couldn't even cry. I had lost my business, my home, my inheritance, my future. All because of my own family. The next morning, I packed my suitcase into my old Honda Civic. As I started the engine, I looked in the rearview mirror. I have two choices. I can spend the rest of my life hating them, or I can build something they can never take away. I turned the key. The engine came to life. I drove west with no destination. No job, no home. Just Grandpa's old toolbox in the trunk, and one promise echoing in my heart. I will start again. Little did I know. That lonely drive would lead me to a stranger who would change my life forever, and begin the journey that would one day bring me back richer than anyone in my family could have imagined. For 3 days, I drove west with no destination. No plan. No home. Only a little over $200 remained in my bank account. Every motel felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. So I slept in my 10-year-old Honda Civic at highway rest stops, using Grandpa's old army blanket to stay warm. Every morning, I woke up asking myself the same question. Now what? By the 4th day, I reached a small town outside Nashville, Tennessee. The gas gauge blinked red. My wallet held just enough cash to fill half the tank. I pulled into an old gas station. As I stood beside the pump calculating every dollar, I noticed an elderly man struggling to push an old pickup truck toward the repair garage. He was alone. The truck barely moved. Without thinking, I ran over. Need a hand? The old man smiled. I won't say no. For the next 10 minutes, we pushed the truck together until it rolled inside. Both of us were covered in sweat. The mechanic laughed. You two looked like a pair of oxen. The old man chuckled. Used to be easier 30 years ago. He wiped his hands on a rag. My name's Walter Hayes. Olivia? He noticed the Massachusetts license plate on my car. Long way from home? I don't really have one anymore. He didn't ask questions. He simply nodded. Sometimes silence is kinder than curiosity. Walter insisted on buying me breakfast. I owe you one. You don't owe me anything. I know, but I'd like the company. We walked into a small diner across the street. The waitress greeted Walter like family. The usual? You know me too well. Over coffee and pancakes, Walter finally asked, So, what brings you all the way to Tennessee? For the first time since Grandpa died? I told someone the truth. Everything. The inheritance. Richard. The lawsuit. Losing the business. Being thrown out of my own home. Walter never interrupted. When I finished, he quietly stirred his coffee. Then he asked, What are you going to do now? I laughed bitterly. I honestly don't know. Walter reached into his wallet and placed a faded business card on the table. Hayes Custom Furniture. I own a furniture workshop about 20 minutes from here. It's not a big company. Never wanted it to be. He smiled. But I need someone who understands wood. I looked at him. I haven't built furniture in months. You built it your whole life. That's enough. I can't afford to pay much. I don't care. You'd have to start Monday. I can. He smiled. Then I guess you're hired. I stared at him. You don't even know me. Walter looked out the window. I know you stopped to help an old man before asking for anything in return. That's usually enough. Monday morning arrived. Hayes Custom Furniture was nothing like Bennett Woodworks. There were no giant machines. No fancy showroom. Just 12 hardworking employees. The smell of cedar filled the air. Country music played softly through an old radio. Everyone introduced themselves with a handshake. Not one person asked why I had left Boston. For the first time in months, I felt safe. Walter watched quietly as I built my first oak dining chair. When I finished, he ran his fingers along every joint, every curve, every corner. He smiled. Henry Bennett taught you well. I froze. You knew Grandpa? Walter nodded. We met at a woodworking convention almost 25 years ago. He beat me in a craftsmanship competition. Walter laughed. I've been trying to build a better rocking chair ever since. Tears filled my eyes. It really is a small world. Over the next year, life slowly began to heal. I rented a tiny apartment above a bakery. The owner charged less because I helped repair broken shelves. I learned every customer's name. The nightmares became less frequent. Some mornings I even woke up smiling. Walter became the grandfather I desperately needed. Not a replacement. No one could replace Grandpa Henry, but someone who reminded me that good people still existed. One afternoon, Walter called everyone into the workshop. "I've got news." The employees gathered around. A national luxury furniture retailer wants custom designs. The contract was worth nearly $8 million. Everyone cheered. Walter turned toward me. "They specifically requested your design sketches." My sketches? They loved every single one. For the first time since losing Bennett Woodworks, someone believed in my talent. Not because I was Henry Bennett's granddaughter, because I had earned it. That night, Walter knocked on my apartment door carrying 2 milkshakes. "We're celebrating." He handed me one. "I've been thinking." "About what?" "My knees are getting too old for 12-hour workdays." I smiled. "So hire someone younger." He laughed. "I already did." Then he became serious. "One day, I'd like you to run this company." I nearly dropped my milkshake. "What?" "I've been watching you. You never leave before everyone else. You know every employee's birthday. You stay late to fix mistakes that aren't yours." He smiled. "You remind me of someone." "My grandfather?" Walter nodded. "Exactly." 3 years passed. Hayes Custom Furniture expanded across the Southeast, then across the country. Our handcrafted designs appeared in luxury hotels, celebrity homes, historic restorations, architectural magazines. Customers waited months for our furniture. The company became one of America's fastest-growing custom furniture brands. One evening, Walter walked into my office carrying a stack of legal documents. "I've made my decision." "What decision?" He placed the papers in front of me. "I've officially named you president and majority partner." I looked at him in disbelief. "Walter, you don't owe me this." He smiled gently. "No, I owe it to the future." As I hugged him, neither of us noticed the business magazine lying on the desk. Its cover featured a headline that made my heart stop. "Bennett Woodworks officially declares bankruptcy. Family blames market conditions." Below the headline was a photograph of Richard Bennett. He looked older, angrier, defeated. I stared at the picture for a long time, not with satisfaction, not with revenge, only sadness, because Grandpa had spent 40 years building something beautiful, and Richard had destroyed it in less than 4. I quietly closed the magazine. I hope one day he understands what he really lost. Walter looked at me thoughtfully. He will. I didn't know it then. But just a few weeks later, I would receive a phone call from Boston that would change everything. Richard wasn't calling to threaten me this time. He was calling because he had no one else left to save him. 3 weeks after the magazine published the story about Bennett Woodworks' bankruptcy, I tried to forget it. I buried myself in work. Hayes Custom Furniture was expanding faster than anyone expected. We had opened 2 new workshops. Architects from New York, Dallas, and Los Angeles were placing orders months in advance. For the first time since leaving Boston, life felt peaceful. Then my phone rang. The caller ID simply read, "Richard Bennett." I stared at the screen until it stopped ringing. A minute later, it rang again, then again. Finally, I answered, "What do you want?" For several seconds, there was only silence. Then I heard something I had never expected. My uncle was crying. "Olivia," his voice sounded older, weaker. "I need your help." I closed my office door. "Help? You didn't ask for my help when you forged Grandpa's signature." He didn't argue. "You didn't ask for my help when you stole my business." Still silence. "You didn't ask for my help when you had me thrown out of my own home." Finally, he whispered, "I know." I almost hung up. Then he spoke again. "Your cousin Kyle was in a serious accident." My anger disappeared for a moment. "What happened?" "Drunk driver?" "He's alive. But he'll never walk again." I closed my eyes. despite everything, Kyle had once been the little boy who followed Grandpa through the workshop carrying tiny pieces of wood. We had grown apart because of Richard. But he was still family. Richard continued. The medical bills are destroying us. The business is gone. The bank took the house. Diane left last month. Every sentence felt heavier than the last. I don't know who else to call. I looked out the office window. Walter was teaching 2 apprentices how to carve walnut by hand. The scene reminded me of Grandpa. He had always said, "Never let another person's bitterness become your own." I'm sorry Kyle is hurting. Richard sighed with relief. So you'll help? I answered quietly. I didn't say that. That evening, Walter found me sitting alone in the workshop after everyone had gone home. You've been here 3 hours. I nodded. My uncle called. Walter sat beside me. What does he want? My help. Walter smiled gently. And what do you want? I don't know. I've spent years rebuilding my life. I finally found peace. I'm afraid if I go back, I'll lose it. Walter remained silent for a long moment. Then he asked, if Henry were sitting here, what would he tell you? I didn't answer immediately, because I already knew. The following morning, I booked a flight to Boston. Not to rescue Richard, not to reclaim the inheritance. I went because Grandpa had taught me something my family never understood. Kindness isn't earned. It's chosen. Boston looked exactly the same. The harbor. The brick buildings. The crisp autumn air. But I wasn't the same woman who had driven away with 1 suitcase. A driver waited at the airport. Not because I wanted luxury, because Hayes Custom Furniture now had clients across the country. Success had quietly found me while I was busy working. Richard's temporary apartment sat in a rundown neighborhood outside the city. When he opened the door, I barely recognized him. The expensive suits were gone. His shoulders slumped. His hair had turned almost completely gray. He looked 20 years older. Thank you for coming. I stepped inside. The apartment was nearly empty. A folding table, 2 old chairs, boxes stacked against the wall. This wasn't the life Richard had imagined. Kyle sat in a wheelchair near the window. He looked down. I'm sorry. Those were the first words he spoke. I blinked. For what? For believing Dad. I thought you stole everything. His eyes filled with tears. I found Grandpa's journals? What journals? Kyle slowly handed me a worn leather notebook. I found them inside an old toolbox after we lost the house. My heart began racing. I opened the first page. Grandpa's handwriting. Neat. Steady. Every page described the final years of his life. There were stories about chemotherapy, about building birdhouses with neighborhood children, about me driving him to every doctor's appointment. Then I reached one particular entry. Richard believes money will heal the emptiness inside him. I wish he understood that love is the only inheritance worth fighting for. Tears blurred my vision. Kyle pointed toward another page. You should read that one. I turned several pages, then froze. If anything ever happens to Bennett Woodworks, I hope Olivia doesn't waste her life trying to get it back. She has something far more valuable. She has the ability to build again. I couldn't stop crying. Even after everything, Grandpa had believed in my future, not my past. Richard quietly spoke. I was so obsessed with proving I deserved everything, I destroyed everything. No, he looked at me. You destroyed yourself. Those words hurt him. Because they were true. As I prepared to leave, Richard stopped me. I don't deserve forgiveness. I nodded. You're right. He lowered his head. But Kyle doesn't deserve to suffer because of my mistakes. I looked toward my cousin. He was crying silently. For the first time, I saw genuine regret in both of them. Not because they had lost money. Because they had finally understood what Grandpa had tried to teach us all along. As I walked back to my car, my phone rang. It was Walter. How did it go? I looked back at the apartment one last time, then smiled sadly. I think my family finally became poor enough to understand what being rich really means. But I had no idea that Grandpa had left behind one final secret. A hidden letter that would expose the truth about Richard's betrayal and give me the chance to honor Grandpa's legacy in a way no one could have imagined. I couldn't stop thinking about Grandpa's journals. During the flight back to Nashville, I read every page. Some entries made me laugh. Others brought tears to my eyes. But one sentence kept replaying in my mind. If you're reading this, there's one more thing you need to know. The next page had been torn out. I searched through the notebook again. Nothing. Someone had removed it. When I landed, Walter was waiting outside the airport. He smiled as I walked toward him. "You look different." "I feel different." He placed my suitcase in the truck. "So, did you find what you were looking for?" I looked out the window. "No, I found something I wasn't expecting." "What was that?" "Peace." Walter smiled. "That's usually worth more." A week later, life returned to normal. Orders poured into Hayes Custom Furniture. Our newest collection had sold out before production even began. Architectural Digest featured one of our handcrafted dining tables. Investors wanted to expand nationwide. Everything was moving forward. Then another surprise arrived. A certified envelope. The return address belonged to Thomas Collins, Grandpa's attorney. Inside was a handwritten note. "Olivia, Henry instructed me to give you this only after every legal dispute surrounding his estate had ended. He believed you would understand why he waited. With respect, Thomas Collins." My hands trembled. There was another envelope inside. Older, yellowed with age. Across the front, in Grandpa's familiar handwriting, were 5 words. "For Olivia. When she's ready." I sat alone in my office before opening it. The letter inside was dated 6 months before Grandpa died. "My sweet Liv, if you're reading this, then life has probably become much harder than either of us hoped. I know Richard. I know how badly he wants what I've built. And I know he may hurt you trying to get it." Tears formed immediately. Grandpa had known. I kept reading. "If Richard chooses greed over family, don't spend your life chasing revenge. The greatest victory isn't taking back what someone stole. It's building something so meaningful that the theft no longer defines you." I paused. That was exactly what had happened. Without realizing it, I had followed Grandpa's advice. Then I reached the final page. Folded inside was a small brass key, along with a simple address. "Storage Unit 214, Boston." I frowned. Storage unit? Grandpa had never mentioned one. The following weekend, I flew back to Boston. Mr. Collins met me outside the storage facility. "I've been waiting years for this day." He unlocked the gate. "This belonged to your grandfather." When we reached Unit 214, he handed me the brass key. "I'll let you have your privacy." The old metal door rolled upward with a loud rumble. Dust floated through the sunlight. Inside wasn't money. It wasn't gold. It wasn't hidden artwork. It was Grandpa's entire life. Shelves filled with woodworking journals. Boxes of family photographs. Every birdhouse we had ever built together. My elementary school drawings. His military medals. Even the rocking chair he had made after Grandma passed away. I covered my mouth and cried. It felt as though I had stepped back into childhood. In the far corner sat an old cedar chest. Inside was a stack of leather-bound notebooks labeled "The Bennett Woodworking Method." Hundreds of original furniture designs, handwritten measurements, construction techniques, business notes, ideas Grandpa had never released to the public. Years of knowledge. Walter would have called it priceless. At the bottom of the chest was one final envelope. This one was addressed to both me and Richard. "If you are reading this together, then you chose family over money." I smiled sadly. We weren't reading it together. Not yet. The letter continued. "If Olivia is reading this alone, then my heart is broken." My tears returned. "Richard, if greed separated us, remember this. No inheritance was ever worth losing your daughter, your son, your sister's child, or your own peace. Money can rebuild houses. Only forgiveness rebuilds families." I carefully packed every journal into boxes. As I prepared to leave, Mr. Collins stopped me. "There's something else." "What is it?" "Henry established one final trust." I looked surprised. "What trust?" "It was intentionally kept separate from the inheritance." "For what purpose?" Mr. Collins smiled. "To help young craftsmen and women who couldn't afford trade school." I stared at him. "He started a scholarship?" Mr. Collins nodded. And he named it after you. The Olivia Bennett Craftsmanship Scholarship. I couldn't speak. Even after everything, Grandpa had been thinking about helping strangers. Back in Tennessee, Walter looked through Grandpa's woodworking journals for hours. Finally, he closed the last notebook. These aren't just furniture plans. They're history. He looked at me. You know what we have to do. I smiled. We're going to publish them. Walter nodded. And teach the next generation. Over the following year, the scholarship funded dozens of students from struggling families. Some became carpenters. Some became furniture designers. Others started small businesses of their own. Each graduate received a small wooden plaque engraved with Grandpa's favorite words. Quality lasts longer than profit. His wisdom continued changing lives. Long after he was gone. One quiet evening, I received another phone call from Boston. This time it was Kyle. Olivia, I found something else. What is it? A buyer wants to tear Grandpa's old house down. My heart stopped. The home where we'd baked cinnamon bread. The workshop where Grandpa had taught me everything. The place where my happiest memories lived. If I didn't act quickly, it would disappear forever. And this time, I wasn't going back to reclaim an inheritance. I was going back to save a legacy. Kyle's words echoed in my mind long after the call ended. A developer bought Grandpa's house. They're planning to demolish it next month. I sat frozen in my office. The old white farmhouse. The workshop. The oak tree where Grandpa had hung a tire swing when I was 7. Every corner of that property held a memory. If the bulldozers arrived, those memories would disappear forever. Walter walked into my office carrying blueprints. One look at my face and he knew something was wrong. What happened? I handed him my phone. They're tearing Grandpa's house down. Walter didn't speak immediately. Instead, he quietly folded the blueprints. When do we leave? I looked up. You'll come with me? He smiled. Family isn't always the people you're born to. Sometimes, it's the people who refuse to let you fight alone. 2 days later, we landed in Boston. The autumn air smelled exactly as I remembered. Crisp leaves, fresh rain, salt from the harbor. As we drove toward Grandpa's neighborhood, my heart beat faster. Then I saw it. Construction fencing surrounded the property. Bright orange signs read, "Coming soon, luxury townhomes." Heavy equipment stood nearby. The workshop windows were boarded up. The sight broke my heart. A man in a hard hat approached us. Can I help you? I'm Olivia Bennett. My grandfather built this house. The man sighed sympathetically. I'm sorry. We begin demolition in 10 days. I looked at the old front porch. The rocking chair Grandpa used every evening was still there, covered in dust. Waiting. It felt like the house itself had been holding its breath. That afternoon, I arranged a meeting with the property developer. His name was Daniel Foster. He welcomed us into his office. I understand this property has sentimental value. It does? But construction has already been approved. I'd like to buy it. Daniel looked surprised. It's no longer for sale. What if I paid above market value? He smiled politely. It isn't about the money. We've already signed contracts. Walter leaned forward. Everything has a price. Daniel shook his head. Not this project. I left feeling defeated. For the second time in my life. I was about to lose Grandpa's home. Only this time, money wasn't the problem. Time was. That evening, Kyle called again. I forgot something. What? There are still people in town who remember Grandpa. The next morning, I visited the local diner where Grandpa used to eat breakfast every Saturday. The waitress recognized me instantly. Little Olivia. I smiled through tears. It's been a long time. Within an hour, word spread through town. Former employees, neighbors, old customers, teachers, veterans, church members. Dozens of people arrived. Each carried a different memory. One elderly woman smiled. Henry rebuilt my porch after my husband died. He refused to take a penny. A firefighter added, he donated furniture after our station caught fire. Another man quietly said, when I lost my job, your grandfather hired me before I even asked. I realized something. Grandpa hadn't just built furniture. He had built an entire community. That evening, Walter had an idea. What if we don't save the house? We save what it represents? I looked at him. What do you mean? He smiled. We turn it into something that serves people. The idea grew bigger with every conversation. Not a museum, not a tourist attraction. A place where future craftsmen and women could learn. Where children could discover woodworking. Where veterans could learn new skills. Where Grandpa's lessons could live on. The following morning, I requested one final meeting with Daniel Foster. This time, I brought a presentation. Old photographs, community letters, newspaper clippings, plans for a nonprofit learning center. When I finished, the room was silent. Daniel slowly closed the folder. My father grew up in this neighborhood. He paused. I remember Henry Bennett. You do? He repaired my mother's kitchen after she couldn't afford a contractor. He never accepted payment. Daniel stared out the window. I was 12 years old. He told me, when life is good to you, leave something behind that helps someone else. He smiled softly. I've never forgotten. He looked back at me. I'm canceling the development. I blinked. What? The investors won't like it. I'll deal with that. Walter laughed quietly. I knew your grandfather had one more miracle left. 3 months later, the old farmhouse stood proudly once again. Fresh white paint covered the walls. The workshop had been restored exactly as Grandpa left it. The tire swing hung from the old oak tree once more. A new wooden sign stood near the entrance. The Henry Bennett Craft and Community Center. Building hands, building hearts. Opening day drew hundreds of visitors. Children built their first birdhouses. Veterans taught woodworking classes. Retired carpenters volunteered their time. No one paid admission. No one made a profit. That was exactly how Grandpa would have wanted it. As the ribbon-cutting ceremony ended, I sat alone on Grandpa's front porch. Walter joined me. You did it. I smiled. We did it. He looked toward the workshop. Henry would be proud. I nodded. I hope so. Just then, Marcus, one of the volunteers, hurried toward us holding an overnight envelope. Olivia? This just arrived. The sender's name made my heart skip. United States Department of Justice. I opened it carefully. Inside was a letter requesting my presence as a witness in a federal investigation. The subject line read, Forgery, Financial Fraud, and Estate Theft. Richard Bennett. After years of silence, the truth was finally catching up with my uncle. And this time, no amount of lies could save him. The envelope from the United States Department of Justice lay on my desk. I read it 3 times before it finally sank in. They wanted me in Boston. Not as a suspect, as a witness. After years of investigations, forensic accountants had uncovered evidence of forged signatures, bank fraud, tax evasion, and estate theft connected to Richard Bennett. The truth Grandpa had quietly endured was finally coming to light. Walter stood in the doorway of my office. So, it's time. I nodded slowly. I never wanted revenge. Walter smiled gently. I know. But justice and revenge aren't the same thing. Those words stayed with me. A week later, I walked into the federal courthouse in Boston. Reporters crowded outside the entrance. News cameras lined the sidewalk. The Bennett family scandal had become headline news. Local businessman accused of multi-million-dollar estate fraud. I took a deep breath and walked inside. Richard sat at the defense table. He looked nothing like the confident businessman who had laughed at me years earlier. His expensive suits were gone. His hands trembled. His shoulders were slumped. When our eyes met, he quietly looked away. The prosecutor called me to the witness stand. After taking the oath, she asked, Ms. Bennett, did your grandfather ever discuss changing his will because of pressure from Richard Bennett? No. Did he ever express fear that someone might misuse his finances? Yes. The courtroom became silent. I described Grandpa's final months, his illness, his concern that money was changing people. Then I handed over the journals, including the pages describing Richard's growing obsession with the inheritance. Next came the handwriting experts. Large screens displayed Grandpa's authentic signatures beside the forged loan documents. The differences were obvious. Stroke angles, letter spacing, pen pressure. Every expert reached the same conclusion. The signatures had been forged. Then the bank's former loan officer testified. His voice shook. I was pressured to approve documents without completing proper verification. Who pressured you? He looked directly at Richard. The defendant. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. The biggest surprise came that afternoon. Richard's former accountant entered the courtroom. He had accepted a plea agreement. He carried several boxes of financial records. I helped hide transfers, the prosecutor asked. Why are you testifying today? He lowered his head. Because Mr. Bennett lied to everyone. He even lied to me. The documents revealed secret accounts, fake invoices, shell companies, and forged authorizations stretching back years. The evidence was overwhelming. During a recess, I stepped into the courthouse hallway. Kyle rolled toward me in his wheelchair. I wanted to tell you something. I smiled softly. You don't have to. Yes, I do. He swallowed hard. I testified too. I looked surprised. I told them everything. Every lie. Every forged document Dad made me deliver. Tears filled his eyes. I should have stopped him. I gently squeezed his shoulder. You finally did. The trial lasted 2 weeks. When closing arguments ended, the courtroom became completely silent. The judge reviewed the evidence carefully. Finally, he looked toward Richard. Mr. Bennett, your father spent his life building a legacy. You spent years trying to steal it. He paused. The greatest tragedy isn't the money. It's that greed destroyed your own family. Richard quietly cried. No one celebrated. There was nothing joyful about watching a family fall apart. The judge announced the verdict. Guilty on every major count. Forgery, wire fraud, financial fraud, estate theft, tax fraud. Richard closed his eyes. His shoulders collapsed. The courtroom remained silent. As officers prepared to escort him away, Richard turned toward me. Olivia? His voice cracked. I'm sorry. Not the shallow apology he'd offered before. This one sounded different. Broken. Honest. I traded my family for money, and I lost both. I looked at him for a long moment. I forgive you. He stared at me in disbelief. But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. He nodded slowly. I know. Those were the last words we spoke that day. Outside the courthouse, reporters rushed toward me. Ms. Bennett? Do you feel vindicated? Is this the ending you wanted? I paused before answering. No. The ending I wanted was for my grandfather to spend his final years surrounded by a family that loved each other. The reporters fell silent. I didn't come here to celebrate someone's downfall. I came to honor the man who taught me that character matters more than wealth. The cameras lowered. No one asked another question. That evening, I drove alone to Grandpa's old house. The Henry Bennett Craft and Community Center was full of life. Children laughed in the workshop. Veterans helped teenagers build bookshelves. Parents drank coffee on the front porch. The old oak tree still stood proudly in the yard. I sat in Grandpa's rocking chair as the sun slowly disappeared beyond the trees. Walter joined me a few minutes later. It's over. I smiled softly. No, it's finally beginning. He looked toward the children inside the workshop. I think Henry would agree. Just as we were about to go inside, my phone buzzed. It was a call from Mr. Collins. Olivia? I've just received the court's final order. What does it say? He laughed quietly. The court has officially restored every remaining Bennett family asset to its lawful owner. I closed my eyes. After years of pain, the inheritance that had torn my family apart had finally come home. But this time, I knew exactly what I was going to do with it. Because Grandpa hadn't spent his life teaching me how to become rich. He had taught me how to make other people's lives richer, and that decision would become the greatest chapter of his legacy. The court officially returned every remaining Bennett family asset to me. The house, the land, the investment accounts that had survived years of legal battles, the remaining rights to Grandpa's woodworking designs. When the final documents arrived, Mr. Collins smiled. Congratulations, Olivia. I looked at the stack of papers. 5 years earlier, I would have thought this was the happiest day of my life. Instead, I quietly closed the folder. I already have everything I need. A month later, I stood in front of hundreds of people outside the Henry Bennett Craft and Community Center. Neighbors filled the lawn. Former employees of Bennett Woodworks sat in the front row. Children ran beneath the old oak tree. Walter stood beside me, smiling proudly. Reporters had come expecting a dramatic announcement. They got something entirely different. I stepped to the microphone. My grandfather believed that wealth should create opportunities, not arguments. Today, I'm announcing the creation of the Henry Bennett Legacy Foundation. The crowd applauded. The foundation will provide free trade school scholarships, apprenticeship programs, emergency assistance for skilled workers, and grants for family-owned woodworking businesses across America. A young apprentice wiped away tears. An elderly carpenter whispered, "Henry would have loved this." I continued. "I've also made another decision." Everyone grew quiet. The Bennett family house will never be sold. It will always belong to the community. It will remain a place where children can learn, veterans can teach, and families can build something together. The applause grew even louder. After the ceremony, Kyle rolled over in his wheelchair. "I brought someone." Behind him stood a young physical therapist. Kyle smiled. "This is Emma." Olivia shook her hand warmly. Kyle laughed. "She says I'm her most stubborn patient." Emma smiled. He's right. For the first time in years, Kyle looked genuinely happy. Not because his life had become easy, because he had stopped letting the past define it. Months later, Richard completed the first stage of his prison sentence. One afternoon, I received a letter. "Olivia, I don't expect forgiveness anymore because you've already given me something I didn't deserve. Peace. I've started teaching woodworking in the prison vocational program. The first birdhouse I built was terrible. The second one reminded me of Dad. For the first time in years, I understand why he loved working with his hands. If I ever earn another chance at life, I hope to spend it building instead of taking. Thank you." I folded the letter carefully. Grandpa used to say that real change begins when excuses end. Maybe Richard had finally reached that place. One crisp autumn afternoon, Walter and I sat on Grandpa's front porch watching children build their first birdhouses. Walter handed me a small wooden box. "I've been saving this." Inside was the very first birdhouse. I had built with Grandpa when I was 8 years old. The paint was faded. The roof leaned slightly to one side. A tiny crooked heart was still carved into the front. I laughed through tears. I thought this was gone forever. Walter smiled. "Some things are worth protecting." Years passed. The Henry Bennett Legacy Foundation expanded across the country. Thousands of students learned skilled trades. Hundreds of struggling family businesses stayed open because of emergency grants. Veterans found new careers through woodworking programs. The community center became a model copied by towns across America. Every new student received the same carved wooden plaque. Quality lasts longer than profit. One spring morning, a little girl named Lily visited the workshop. She was 10 years old and shy. She held up a small birdhouse she had just finished. "It's not perfect," she whispered. I smiled. "Can I tell you a secret?" She nodded. "My grandfather taught me that perfect isn't the goal." "What is?" "Building something with love." She looked at her birdhouse again, then smiled proudly. "I think I did that." "You absolutely did." That evening, as the sun set behind the old oak tree, I sat alone in Grandpa's rocking chair. The porch was quiet. Children's laughter echoed in the distance. I looked toward the workshop windows glowing with warm light. For a moment, I could almost imagine Grandpa standing inside, covered in sawdust, smiling as another child learned how to use a hammer for the first time. I whispered, "You were right, Grandpa. They could take the house. They could take the business. They could even take the inheritance. But they could never take what you taught me." A gentle breeze stirred the leaves. Somehow, it felt like an answer. Today, visitors who walk into the Henry Bennett Craft and Community Center see a simple wooden plaque hanging above the entrance. It doesn't list donations. It doesn't mention wealth. It simply reads, "The strongest people aren't the ones who hold on to everything. They're the ones who lose everything and still choose kindness." And beneath it, in smaller letters, "In loving memory of Henry Bennett, who proved that the greatest inheritance is a good heart. The end?"